And we're now moving to agenda item 2. So the second agenda item is the consideration of a new petition on which we'll not be taking evidence. Petition 1676 on the Land Registration etc. Scotland Act 2012 was submitted by Tony Rosser. The petitioner believes there are two major flaws in the Act, and his petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to review the Act with particular regard to the cadastral map and the provision of supporting materials. Members have a copy of the petition and a SPICE briefing. With regard to the cadastral map, the SPICE briefing explains that this is the statutory term given to the map which covers the whole of Scotland. The briefing sets out the current process for mapping in the Land Register under the 2012 Act, noting that the base map currently used is the Ordnance Survey map. It adds that section 11.6 of the Act empowers Scottish ministers to make regulations to allow other systems of mapping to be used. The briefing notes that the Registers of Scotland receives 500 updated map tiles per week from Ordnance Survey, and explains that sections 11.7 of the Act allows the Registers of Scotland to make consequential changes to the Land Register when the base map is updated. The petitioner indicates that within this process he would like it to be mandatory for the Registers of Scotland to check the validity of any updated Ordnance Survey maps, which he considers will, quote, avoid any inaccuracies or questions about the validity of updated maps. He also considers that where maps are in dispute, the Register of Scotland should arrange a resurvey to be conducted by Ordnance Survey or Registers of Scotland, and to give proprietors the opportunity to question or approve the revised plan. The SPICE briefing explains that under section 80 of the Act, the Keeper of the Registers of Scotland must rectify the Land Register where there is, quote, a manifest inaccuracy in a title sheet or the cadastral map, and notes other inaccuracies. It adds that where an individual has a query or concern about an inaccuracy, they can refer it to the Lands Tribunal for Scotland. In recent correspondence with the clerks, the petitioner indicates that he does not recognise this as being the case. He states that he had 3 refusals to update an error on his title deed plan and was not made aware that he could raise the issue with the Lands Tribunal. The second concern raised in the petition relates to the provision of material in support of requests to the Registers of Scotland for a revision of the deeds, specifically in the event that a property owner has died. The petitioner believes that any such request should be supported by a death certificate. He indicates his understanding that this was, quote, commonplace under previous legislation, and considers that this negates the possibility of error by a proprietor or solicitor. The SPICE briefing refers to correspondence with the Registers of Scotland, which states, quote, the Keeper takes the view that if a solicitor tells us that a proprietor is deceased, we are entitled to rely on that. I should note here also that the petitioner has contacted the clerks to say that it's not necessary to use a legal person within this process. The clerks have checked this with SPICE, which has confirmed that technically the petitioner is correct. SPICE would, however, stress that not using a solicitor is rare in practice. SPICE notes also that it is often the case that people would use solicitors when dealing with complex matters before the Lands Tribunal, as were referred to previously. The clerk's note indicates that the Economy, Jobs and Fair Work Committee took evidence on 2 draft SSIs in November, and the instruments were not approved. The Scottish Government subsequently laid a replacement draft instrument, the Registers of Scotland Digital Registration etc. Regulations 2018 draft. The Economy, Jobs and Fair Work Committee took evidence on that instrument at its meeting on Tuesday, 30th of January, and agreed to recommend that the draft regulations be approved. I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action. Angus?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Having served on the RACI Committee in 2012 when it scrutinised the Land Registration Bill, I have to say I've got some sympathy with this petition, and it doesn't seem to me to be a big ask. However, I'd be keen to know if there are capacity issues at the Registers of Scotland before we take this any further. Unfortunately, I can't recall why the need for a death certificate wasn't included in the bill or the Act at the time. But I think there's certainly merit in looking at this further.
Yeah, well, it did strike me as something that, if it's possible to represent yourself and take the action forward yourself, then would that not give everybody comfort that there was a death certificate rather than relying on the word of a solicitor? But I also think that, is there not something in the petitioner's own evidence that actually his issue was that his solicitor didn't do the job correctly, or that may have been something behind it. So would this give more confidence? It would be a reasonable question to ask.
Is redress is down to you. You know, if you find there's been an error, and there's also time bars, and I've actually had a couple of constituents who've come to me with this very problem, so I think there is a need to revisit it and look at it. You know, and you suddenly, if you've lived somewhere a long time and then you suddenly find the boundaries moved and you find yourself time barred from addressing the issue, that is incredibly inequitable and unfair, because you didn't know about it. So, you know, I think this is something that we really do need to take forward and have a look
perhaps
at.
in contact, was it Register of Scotland? I mean, again, the petitioner says that he didn't know he had the right to appeal to the Lands Tribunal. So is there a process, is there a form, is there information that's provided to anybody in that situation that would flag that up? It would be worth asking them that.
So yeah, I think the Registers of Scotland would be definitely a port of call, and maybe there is a need for a greater public awareness of what the process actually is and what is available to people. So I think contact them and the government, Scottish Government, on the action called for here.
Yeah, and certainly from the Scottish Government's perspective, are they looking at the legislation to ensure that it's doing what they intended to? And is this the kind of example that allow them to reflect further on what's happened with the legislation?
It just seems to be, in effect, a loophole, you know, also a gap in things that, you know, people are falling through. I would hope there aren't an awful lot, but for those who are, it's a big issue.
Okay, Brian?
I think you're noting that the Economy, Jobs, Fair Work Committee just taken evidence on this instrument. I'd be quite interested to try and cross-reference a little bit and see what kind of evidence.
Although it does say that they agreed to recommend the draft regulations be approved, so it might be worth just flagging that up, or getting a sense of what, I mean, quite interesting the fact that the original ones weren't agreed, so that's maybe something that we can look at further. So I think there's quite a lot there. Then we'd be agreeing to write to the Scottish Government and writing to the Register of Scotland in the terms that have already been identified, but recognising that if there's an issue about people having to deal with a system that's not friendly to them in that sense, what has caused that. So perhaps this issue of capacity is something that would flag up as well. Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay, if that's agreed, that ends our conclusion of petitions today.